Thank you very much for the invitation to Daniela, to Verena, to Angeliki, to Victoria, and to Roberta. And thank you everyone from the standing group for being here. So the work I'm going to be presenting today is a collective work, and even if I'm the one giving the presentation, you can see from the screen that all of the contributors, the colleagues from across Europe that have taken part in the data analysis and the coordination also, especially of the work that we've been doing. Before I start, I will share with you this link on the chat, which is the link to the survey registry. And what I will be presenting to you today is essentially an analysis of the metadata. And for those of you who might not be familiar with this term, metadata is data about the data, so information about the technical characteristics of data, in our case, survey data, quantitative survey data. And this is metadata that we have obtained and that we have analyzed from the compilation of all of the surveys that we have captured in the Ethnic and Migrant Minorities Survey Registry. So what I'm presenting to you today is a snapshot of what will become, hopefully, our first article summarizing the landscape of survey research in Europe. Some of this analysis will also be available in, hopefully, around a month or so, in a version, a second version, an updated version of a report that we have produced as an output of the cost action Ethmigsurveydata, as Daniela presented. And you will be able to find a lot more tables and a lot more details on that report when it will be out in about a month, as I said. So I want to emphasize that the work that we've done, on the one hand, the compilation of these surveys in the survey registry, but also the data analysis of the metadata is collective work, even if it's me presenting it today. So I'll be introducing very quickly what is the motivation and the context of the survey registry, and then more generally, the tools that we're creating in the Ethmigsurveydata cost action, and then all of the tools that we are generating in what we are creating as a survey data hub. I will be also explaining the methodology that we've followed to produce the survey registry, which is the first open data and open access tool that we have generated. I will then explain a bit the characteristics of the compiled metadata and for which countries and how many surveys we've uncovered. And then I will be presenting the findings that we have already for 24 countries, which is not the complete set of 33 that we're hoping to have at the end of the process, but it's already a very substantial number of countries that allow us to make substantiated claims about what's the picture of survey data availability across Europe in general. And I will conclude by outlining what are the next steps in our collective endeavor, in our collective efforts in the cost action. So in terms of the motivation and the context, obviously this audience is extremely aware of all of the changes that have happened across Europe, especially over the past 30 years, all of you being expert primarily in migration studies, you're very well aware that Europe has gradually and steadily become an important point of destination for migrants of all areas of the world seeking to improve their life conditions or escaping from famine, from war, or from persecution due to different circumstances. And obviously everyone has very close at heart the refugee inflow of 2014, 2015 that made this kind of very aware in everybody's minds and in the public debate as well. But regardless of these sort of peaks of inflows that we find every so often, the reality is that Europe has become a steady place and destination of migration, but also a source of migration within the European area and towards the rest of the world as well. At the same time, Europe has always been an area of the world that it's very heterogeneous in terms of its population composition. So unlike some of the depictions that one might have about the European continent, Europe is really not a socially homogeneous place. It's an area of the world that has seen exchanges in terms of and movements and those sorts of diversity flows in terms of linguistic, regional, national, and racial elements, and has seen a gradual and historical shift in terms of which of those groups were conforming themselves as a majority through processes of nation building, and which other groups have at different moments of time become minorities in certain territories. So these two different but parallel sort of trends and circumstances in Europe mean that we have a situation of increasing diversity, both because of migration flows, but also because of the intrinsic ethnic heterogeneity and social and linguistic diversity that Europe has always consisted of. Now, both the migrant and kind of the ethnic diversity of Europe means that there's a wide range of stakeholders from policymakers to administrators that need to implement policies that have already been designed, to civil society organizations that either represent or advocate either minority, ethnic minority or migrant minority groups, or just simply researchers, whether they are academic researchers or they are applied researchers working, for example, in think tanks. This wide range of stakeholders are interested in obtaining informative and reliable indicators of the inclusion, the integration, and the barriers for inclusion and integration of ethnic and migrant minorities. So given this need for information, a large group of researchers that have come together in this cost action called Ethmigsurveydata have put efforts together to try to bring to light all of the survey data that it's available on both ethnic and migrant minorities. And in fact, there are a wide range of comparative cross-country studies that are using survey data relating to ethnic and migrant minorities in one way or another in order to examine patterns and dynamics of inclusion and of integration. There are also quite a numerous range of single country studies. But despite these really very important contributions, it is the case, and this is one of our main objectives to try to mitigate, that there's still a very considerable and used potential of the survey data that has been produced targeting ethnic and migrant minorities across Europe. So even if we do have a lot of research on ethnic and migrant minorities through quantitative survey research, the reality is that this data is extremely underused, and we are not leveraging as much as we could all of the information and the data that we could mobilize for our analysis and for our knowledge generation. This is accompanied with a range of challenges that researchers who are interested in understanding ethnic and migrant populations and that would like to use or to generate new surveys are constantly facing. And some of them are quite known to those people who have worked with quantitative survey data on ethnic and migrant minorities before. Some of them are relating to sampling, how to design samples to what are very often hard to reach population. Secondly, in addition to the difficulties of sampling, how can we confront problems and specificities relating to response rates and to the difficulty of achieving good response rates, among other things, because, for example, of language difficulties, but also because of the different life patterns and life dynamics and mobility, both geographical, but also in terms of working times of the ethnic and migrant minorities that we want to study, as well as the challenges that we might confront by using certain modes of interviewing, for example, telephone interviewing or online surveys that might not reach sufficiently well these minorities, and also issues relating to how much trust these communities and these different minorities might feel vis-a-vis researchers, or in general terms, people who are collecting data about them, because of misgivings about the use that information can have, and what sort of harm they can perceive from that data collection. So these are a range of challenges that the cost action ethnic survey data aims to face and tries to provide some solutions that confronts those different challenges. On the one hand, by providing tools that will enhance our ability to produce more wide-ranging and more detailed analysis of a larger number of ethnic and migrant minorities and for a larger number of countries, by providing tools that facilitate access to the surveys that exist. But on the other hand, by producing documents, by producing best practices guidelines in relation to how to face and confront those challenges when we want to study ethnic and migrant populations with quantitative survey data. So in this context, the wider context of the cost action, this particular paper will be analyzing in particular the survey level metadata that we've actually collected through one of those tools that we are generating. And the first tool that it's now fully functional and available freely online to everyone who wants to use it. And this is the Ethnic and Migrant Minorities Survey Registry, which is a tool that we have created in order to be able to create a sort of census of all of the surveys that exist across Europe since the early 2000s and targeting ethnic and migrant minority populations. So the information that we have from those surveys that are already visible in this tool generates metadata that we can analyze itself in a quantitative manner to get a picture of what are the research strengths, but also what are the research gaps in the field. Now, how have we gone about constructing the Ethnic and Migrant Minorities Survey Registry? Well, first of all, we've designed the registry so as to provide a single access point to information on all of the surveys. Ideally, this is our ambition and what we try to do, that have been undertaken across Europe since January 2000. And surveys that obviously need to have a substantive number of ethnic and migrant minority respondents. And very importantly, we've created this tool as a free online tool that allow us to identify the surveys and pushes forward the FAIR principles, that these surveys must be findable, they must be accessible, the data relating to the survey, so the metadata should be interoperable so that both humans and machines can actually scan through the information, and also that the information should be reusable. This is what those four letters FAIR stand for: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we do that by providing very detailed information about them. Now, to generate this registry, we have followed a very long and arduous methodological process to generate a number of protocols to how to go about to generate the registry. First, we spent around 9 months delimiting the scope of the registry, which types of surveys would be included. And we decided that we would be focusing exclusively on survey data that was quantitative and sample-based, and that it needed to focus on at least one of the dimensions of the integration or inclusion of ethnic or migrant minorities, but also that these surveys needed to meet certain minimal sample size criteria that were a little bit flexible depending on the countries and how data rich or data poor those countries were. We also defined the search process such that all of the countries would be looking for surveys in the same way, using the same guidelines, so as to ensure that when we produce a census, we can be sufficiently confident that we've searched for surveys in more or less the same way across the countries. And then we have generated a template to document the metadata, which was an Excel-based template that contained over 200 metadata variables. So metadata variables are the fields of information about the survey that each team need to fill in for any given survey that they actually captured, that they actually located. And finally, we've implemented a kind of long and very detailed policies of quality checks, of a quality control process to ensure that the metadata compiled in each country is representing the information about those surveys correctly, and that it's coherent and it's offered across all of the countries in more or less the same manner. Now, this map shows you in green all of the countries, the 25 countries for which we already have surveys already uploaded into the registry. And as you can see, there's kind of a wide range of situations in terms of how many surveys we have uncovered, we have detected, and we have properly documented in the registry. You can see in green the countries and the number of surveys that have actually gone now through the quality control and that are displayed in the survey registry. Portugal has the 24 in red because these 24 surveys have already been fully quality controlled and are displayed in the registry, but the case of Portugal is not completed because the Portuguese team is still compiling information about an extra number of surveys that they've not had time to complete documenting yet. And you can see in blue those countries where we are really wrapping up the quality control process, and we hope to be adding those countries to the registry hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks. And in yellow, those where the quality control process is midway through, and it might still take us about a month or so to add, but we hope that by the end of the summer they will be up in the registry. And as you can see, there's a very wide range of situations. There are some countries that are extremely rich in terms of the survey data available, notably France, the UK, Germany, Spain, but also the Netherlands, Italy, and Austria, and other countries with smaller but sizable numbers also given their population size as well. Now, I will be walking you through some of those findings, analyzing the metadata on these surveys. And I will not be able to cover all of the dimensions that we can actually examine in terms of research strengths and knowledge gaps that the metadata allows us to do. And this is the goal of the reports that I mentioned just before. But I will be bringing some sort of snapshots of themes that I think are interesting. First, I'm going to focus on geographic and population coverage, and particularly a distinction between surveys that are produced at the national level, so nationwide surveys that try to generate samples that are a priori representative of the ethnic or migrant minorities of the country as a whole, versus surveys that are focusing on subnational hence that are only trying to represent and to give a picture of the situation of ethnic or migrant minorities either in a given locality, municipality, or in a set of municipalities that are not a full representation of the country, or it could be, we also consider at the subnational level, provinces or regions. So one or few units that are not the country as a whole. And the second table that you see is how the subnational surveys break down depending on the types of areas at the subnational level that are being studied, whether these are predominantly urban areas and cities, whether they are kind of smaller towns and suburbs, or whether they are rural or semi-rural, thinly populated areas, or whether they are a mix. And you can look at the table at your own time. I've actually marked in red the level that is clearly dominant in some countries, and in blue countries where there's more of a balance between the different levels. And what comes across in this analysis is that, first of all, there is no single pattern of dominance in terms of the preferred geographical coverage, whether surveys are predominantly national or they're predominantly focusing on subnational levels, or even which types of subnational levels. So we can't say across Europe, for example, the vast majority of the surveys are national. This is the case in many countries, but in some countries, like we can see in Germany, in Croatia, or in Italy, there's a very nice balance between around half of the surveys have been conducted at the nationwide level, and the other half at the subnational level. And the same goes for which types of subnational surveys have subnational levels have been covered. But what we can conclude from these examination is that typically we find more national level surveys, and also importantly that there's a kind of very few surveys that are targeting rural or semi-rural areas. So as a future recommendation for future research is that, because we have a knowledge gap regarding the inclusion and integration of ethnic and migrant minorities in smaller towns and in semi-rural areas in Europe, this might be a priority for future research, where we need to conduct surveys more in the future, because we know less. Another element of this geographic and population coverage is relating to the dimension of whether the studies are standalone single country studies, or whether they are included in some form of cross-country study, cross-national study. And here what we do find is that generally speaking, cross-country studies are a minority. So they are about a third of all of the surveys that we've, the more than 1,200 surveys that we have uncovered, but that they are actually very unevenly covered across the 24 countries that we now have represented in the registry. And clearly they are very scarcely available in countries that are not part of the EU, and hence might not have benefited so much from EU framework program funding and projects. So here the recommendation and the kind of the main line to return in terms of how we can move forward and progress and cover some of these research gaps is that there is really an opportunity moving forward for the funders, but also for the researchers, to try to strengthen our knowledge by promoting more cross-national surveys of good quality that would encompass the largest possible number of countries, and not necessarily the usual countries that tend to be typically represented in those cross-national studies. Another element that I think might be of interest to you and to the members of the standing group is which types of ethnic and migrant minority subpopulations are studied. And this graph gives you the percentage of different ways of classifying the target population of the survey, whether it includes all of the residents who are foreigners in any given location, whether that's the country as a whole or the specific subnational location of the survey, whether they include all of the residents of foreign origin, and by that we mean that have a foreign ancestry, whether we're including, the surveys are including all residents of both first and second generation migrants, or then another kind of range of options that you have in relation to covering all of the ethnic minority population or only a selection of the previous one. And here, what stands out is that there's roughly twice as many surveys targeting migrant minorities, around 65%, than surveys that are targeting ethnic minorities, roughly 1/3 of all of the studies. So we do see that there's more of an abundance of information on migrant origin minorities and less so for what we could think of autochthonous ethnic minorities. And in reality, I just not to make too long this presentation, I decided not to put the country by country breakup, but there is a very huge concentration on Central and Eastern European countries being the ones that specialize on ethnic minorities, and particularly Roma minorities. So while it is important to maintain this diversity, and we think that this is a very good element of richness of the surveys, it would be useful, and this is one of our policy recommendations, perhaps to coordinate for pan-European surveys of the same groups so that we can improve also the comparison across countries. And this slide, which you will surely not be able to see in detail on the screen, but because I will make both the slides available and you will have the recording, you can pause it and look at it with a little bit more time, gives you a sense of which are the specific subpopulations and the top 5 categories of target populations that are coming across more frequently in each of the countries. You can see this breakup that I was telling you before of Eastern and Central European countries more likely producing surveys that are focusing on ethnic minorities, whereas the kind of Western, the Nordic and the Southern European countries are more likely focusing on migrant minorities. Although we see that countries can have a mix of both. And for example, in Spain, we do find this mix of surveys that focus on migrants and foreign residents and non-EU populations, but also that study the Roma minority. So you find some mixes as well also in Western European countries. And this slide allows you also to see that some groups come across as kind of more often being studied across several countries, like for example, the Turkish migrant minority, or for example, the Polish migrant minorities as well. So there's a number of commonalities, but a lot of diversity in relation to the populations studied. Another important dimension that our registry allows us to cover is what are the gender and the age composition of the samples. And whereas the coverage of the ethnic and migrant minority populations by sex is quite balanced, and this is why I've not bothered to put a table for that. By contrast, the surveys that we have found are overwhelmingly focusing on adults. So 2/3 are focusing on adults or a combination of adults and minors. So here we can see that there's an important knowledge gap that we might want to collectively improve over time so as to improve the research capacity in terms of understanding the specific inclusion challenges and the needs that the youth and the children of ethnic and migrant minorities are confronting, because they're really not very well represented in the survey data that exists so far. Another important element that the survey metadata allows us to capture is what are the topics that have been studied with these surveys. And although obviously the topics have covered have evolved over time, and there's peaks and valleys relating also to important contextual elements like an increased focus on refugees and asylum seekers since 2015. There is a relatively stable element of the topics that are constantly being studied more. And this relates to topics around the demographics of the migrant and ethnic minority communities, as well as in particular education and labor market inclusion characteristics and barriers. And what these also allow us to assess is that there are some topics that are very little represented in the surveys, and particularly some that we as researchers of migration studies might find particularly important, like migration processes and trajectories. So it would be important perhaps to focus on what topics are less represented, and to integrate in a more systematic manner in the future question modules on some of these more underrepresented topics. And these figure just summarizes some of the kind of a selected number of topics. This is not the full picture of all of the topics that we identify, because otherwise the graph would not be readable, but it allows us to see already, as I said, that nearly 80% of the surveys include systematically a good coverage of demographic characteristics. A majority of them includes a good coverage of questions relating to educational attainment, human capital and skills. But then other topics that we would consider as migration scholars really important, like citizenship and naturalization, are only included in between 20 and 30% of the surveys. And obviously topics like asylum and refugee issues have only been present as of more recently. I will be finishing now with the kind of very quick ideas about the technical characteristics. I don't want to bore you, so there will be no tables or graphs in this part. But just to mention some elements that I consider that are important. First of all, it's good news that in most countries, there's a good balance between surveys that are single cross-section, so done in a single point in time and not repeated, versus other surveys that have a certain type of overtime component, whether that's a repeated cross-sectional survey or longitudinal proper panel surveys. But actually, the distribution of these kind of time variant or time fixed elements is quite considerable across countries. So in countries where this overtime component is lacking, and this is the case for a lot of the Central and Eastern European countries, it would be good perhaps to invest on instruments that would allow to gain insights about the evolution of the integration of ethnic and migrant minorities. Another point that I would like to emphasize is representativeness of the surveys. And globally speaking, when we consider the 1,200 surveys, around 80% of them are considered representative, but there's many surveys that are not representative of the ethnic and migrant minority populations that they want to study. And this is because they are employing non-probability sampling, or because they provide no information on sample design. So there's really a need to try to put more emphasis on what are the best practices, on try to share knowledge and insights across the research communities in Europe on how to design and to execute the surveys such that they can be representative of their target population. And another important point is the mode of interview. And although face-to-face interviewing is the norm in the field, it should be highlighted that despite this modality, only around half of the surveys actually included questionnaires that were translated into the mother tongue of the minority studied. And this has important consequences in terms of response rates and in terms of the quality of the data that is being produced, because it's biasing data collection to ethnic and migrant minorities that are already very proficient in the language of the country where the survey is being produced. And to finish, I would highlight big gaps in terms of the technical characteristics of the surveys. On the one hand, we have found through the information that we have on the surveys in the registry that most surveys actually do not provide information on response rates in their documentation. And this is an important limitation, because without response rate information, we offer a very partial picture of the quality of the data collected. So we can't really assess the extent of the quality of the data that has been collected. But another important limitation of the surveys that we have located and covered is that they are not easily accessible, and that very often they are not very well documented, or they are not citable because they have not been, for example, made available through data archives. So going forward, both the funders, but also the research community needs to put a lot more emphasis in making sure that the survey data is preserved and that it becomes accessible and that it's well documented so that people can actually reuse it and make the most out of it. I'm finishing now. What are the next steps? What we will be doing in the next few months is to add all of the other countries that were still in yellow and blue in the map that I showed before. And we're hoping that by the end of the summer, most of the countries, of the 33 countries that participate in the cost action, will be included in the registry, and that we will have detected anywhere from 1,500 to 1,600 surveys. So this constitutes a really rich census of surveys that we hope will actually entice colleagues to analyze the data and to reuse the data, and also to showcase their survey data in the future in the registry so that we can all make the most of all of these fabulous survey data and sources of information. If you're interested in the project, there's all sorts of ways that you can contact us through our website. We have a YouTube channel as another community that you can actually subscribe to get information about all of our publications and report. And obviously you can connect to us through Twitter, and we also have a Facebook page, but I didn't want to put too many things on this slide. So thank you very much. And I'll be very happy to discuss the work both with questions or suggestions that you may have now.